Hi, everyone. This is Ashutosh Sinha at the Scientific Talk, and hope you're having a great time wherever you are right now. Scientific Talk is a show where we focus on some very pertinent issues, which are around talent topics for organizations, leaders, and teams. We come across these issues every day as we speak to our clients, our career transition leaders, and coach candidates. And we pick up one of these topics and speak to some of our top industry mentors and leaders out there, and even clients sometimes, to bring it to you how to tackle and have a real hard-hitting conversation, honest conversation on what's going on in these areas. So today I have with me a very important and known luminary. And I'm saying important because it's actually interesting for you to know. It's a reunion of sorts. I've known Jacqueline Lynham Lewis for over 2 decades, maybe more. And we have worked together at Sapien a long time back. And it's great to have her on the show today. Jackie has been a very senior leader in the industry with over 37 years of experience across top multinationals such as Sapient globally, Wipro, and Suffolk in Boston. She's based in Boston right now. And she's someone who mentors and coaches a lot of people, small organizations, and of course is in touch with her previous organizations as well. So Jackie and I got talking, and there's some very interesting thing happening here. We might be working together again at Scientific very soon. So Jackie, warm welcome to you on the show. And I'd really love to hear how you feel this morning. It's from Dubai to Boston. It's about close to 80 degree Fahrenheit or something or more here, probably 40, 50 at your end. So how does it feel?
Yeah, well, it's certainly not 80 degrees here. It's cloudy, rainy, but it's a typical April in New England. We call this the mud season for that reason. It just rains almost every day. But I'm excited. As you said, it is a reunion of sorts. We knew each other back, gosh, probably over 20 years ago. We helped build an organization together, and I'm excited. It was great to reconnect. We saw each other a couple of weeks ago in New York, and those conversations got me excited about the possibility of working together with you again.
Likewise, Jackie, I can't tell you how excited I am about that opportunity. So today, Jackie, we're going to focus on some very interesting conversations around the subject of talent management, and especially focused on leadership integration in organizations. It's such a hard-hitting issue these days, especially after the pandemic. What's really happened there is that leaders who join organizations with a lot of planning and pre-research for them to come in with everything set up often don't integrate well. And this was always an issue in the industry, but it's kind of gone up probably 6 times more. That's what data tells me. And my research team also tells me that one of the things which organizations are looking for is that how do they integrate leaders faster in a very short patience scenario where they're looking at them to be quickly on the foot and give ROI. So what do you think really is happening there, Jackie?
There's a couple of different things. I don't necessarily think consistently organizations think about the impact of that onboarding. You spend so much time trying to recruit and attract talent and get people to say yes to join the organization. And then oftentimes it falls flat. I mean, literally falls flat. Somebody might accept an offer and not hear from the organization until their first day. And that period of time is when you may lose the candidate. They may be counter offered at their organization. But I think what happens is people forget what their experience was like and how important that first 30, 60, 90 days is, and how thoughtful you must be to integrate both into the role, but as well into the culture of the organization.
That's really true. That's really true. Do you think, I mean, I was looking at the HBR data, it said leaders leave within 18 months across organizations. That's really, really interesting
Mm.
because it's a huge number out there and it's kind of big cause of worry. And do you think that, that is something related to people beginning to hire what they like most, like clones rather than people who are diverse? What's your thought about that?
Yeah, I think so. You often hire people that you think you'd want to, way back to our days. I remember when I first started, we would ask people for feedback on a candidate and they would say, "Oh yeah, I'd love to go out and have some dinner with them." And I would say, "Well, you're not hiring them to have dinner with you. You're hiring them to because they're going to add value to this organization. And not only is it good for the organization, it's good for that individual." And so I think people have started to think more broadly about what kind of skills do you want and what kind of diversity of thought do you want. And so sometimes you are bringing in somebody that may need a different onboarding. And I think part of going back to your earlier question, I think what's also important is customization in an onboarding plan, not just to give everybody the same thing because people have different needs in order to be successful into the new organization.
That's a really important thing you touched there, customization. And onboarding is so very important. I've been in organizations where that's been a huge topic of discussion always, that how do we ensure that people who come in are not just well prepared to know what the job description is, but how the ground is prepared for them to be successful in the first 90 days and 180 days, let's say.
Mhm.
So, have you noticed any anecdotes from your experience where something has gone drastically wrong if the onboarding piece is not tailor-made for the leader?
Yeah, I have. I mean, unfortunately, I have, right? And part of that is, when I think back to really good onboarding plans, it's been, every detail. And a lot of that falls within the HR leaders, because they're connected to the business leaders to build out those plans. And sometimes things are just missed. And as I said, maybe it's not enough conversations with the person before they start. But a good example I have is in my last organization, which was the construction industry for all intents and purposes, and somebody was hired in, and everybody put the thought into what it was going to give them their navigation of understanding who's who. So it was all the onboarding was all about building relationships. And about 30 days in, the person said to me, "Nobody's told me how to do work here." And I said, "What do you mean? You've been in this industry for 27 years." And he said, "That's true, but the way I built buildings in my former company to the way you build buildings here is very different." And that was a huge miss. There was no meeting set up around systems and processes and just how you even sell the work. And so that was a good learning for myself and the team to say every component needs to be covered. Don't assume somebody already knows it because they have industry experience. And that's to your point, that's where the customization comes in as well.
So true, so true. And that's a really good example because I agree with you. A lot depends on how we shouldn't take it for granted that someone has been in that kind of a job or necessarily need to how to perform the same job again in a different organization. Because to your point, absolutely, so much changes because of culture, context, and region. In fact, people move countries, and there's a huge context change there as well. So, Jackie, you had great international experience across Wipro and other global companies like Sapient and all. And what's been that one thing or that one mantra you would like to give to a new leader joining an organization? The first two or three things anyone taking up a new role within a current organization or making a big move across countries, what should they keep in mind when they take up that offer?
I think there's a couple of things. One important thing, particularly for global organizations, is understand what's global in nature and what's local in nature. So not only understand the sort of corporate culture, if you will, but understand how things are done in your particular region or your particular office. I think that's an important thing that it's often missed, and it's often missed by people developing the onboarding plans, to be honest. The second is, particularly if you're joining an organization where that industry is new to you, understand what it is the company does, how they execute work, how they make money. particularly if you're in a functional role, you often aren't as relevant or aren't as impactful if you don't know what the company does. You may know, say, HR, you may know finance, but if you don't understand that industry, you really don't, you're not as impactful as you could be. And then the third, and it's equally important, so I would put these all as equal importance, to be honest, is the relationship side. Get out there, meet people. I always say to people, do not sit in your office.
Mm.
Get out there, get out in the field if there's a field, get out and meet and greet, and don't just stay in your comfort zone, because those relationships in a global company are going to allow you to pick up the phone, call somebody in another region, and figure out how to get work done. And not only just get it done really successfully. And also those, one more thing, those relationships are gonna be those people that are also gonna help with you with your onboarding. You know, I have found that personally. You know, I got great advice in my last organization because I was coming into a functional HR role. The industry was construction, and somebody said, get out into the field, go to the job sites for your first 6, 9 months. Don't be in an office. And I took that advice, and I saw other colleagues or other leaders come in and they didn't heed that advice. And then there's sort of not a do-over for that. They've missed that opportunity to build relationships and learn the business. And it makes it much, much harder for them to do their work after that.
Actually, that's so very true, and you really touched again on a very, very good point. It happened to me as well that I was at a retail organization for the first time in my life, technically speaking, in a large conglomerate. And one thing one of the board members told me, she said, "You need to be out there at stores, every store." They had
Mhm.
nearly 2,000 stores, and it was hard to be at every store. But I made sure I was the foot in every country. The presence was, and it really made a difference because, to your point, I not only got to know the people, but I got to know the business much better versus sitting back in the headquarters and making my decisions or helping and supporting business. So you're so right there. One interesting thing that's been happening is, and again, I'm going through some data there, but 32% people who have, you know, answered a survey which Scientific rolled out some time back, they felt, these leaders, and these are usually our candidates who come for career transition advice at CXO level, CEO levels for coaching, they said that after the pandemic, they find it very, very hard to do this, to be out there with the teams, to get out there with
Mm.
the clients, to be out at the field, because people got so used to staying behind cameras and sometimes even switched off cameras, not switched on cameras. So when a
Mm.
leader, there's a very interesting incident. I was talking to a very large food client. He said the big problem was that this major guy who was the head of a large function joined in, and for 7 or 8 days he had no one to talk to except a couple of people and his boss himself, because everyone was behind cameras at home, working remote, and there was no sense of really being welcomed or onboarded besides the technical onboarding which happened. How do we crack that code? Because that's really beginning to hit organizations.
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations are struggling with this topic around, how much time in the office versus how much time out. I will say my last organization at Suffolk, the CEO did sort of take a visible stand on that, which was, they called it office primary. And it was, you were coming in the office 4 days a week, 1 day remote. And that's probably unique. But again, I go back to this functional versus operational in some organizations. You talked about the retail shops. Part of the role of somebody in the function is to mirror that work, because the person going into the retail shop has to be there, right? And if you do all of your interaction with them, there sort of creates a dividing line that doesn't need to be there. Um, and so, what was interesting was at Suffolk, and most organizations dealt with this, you hired so many people during the pandemic, and they didn't know life before. So they came in, They had been hired over a video, and then they came into an organization where they were home and they worked remote, and all their interaction, you're right, was via video. And so organizations need to make a concerted effort for those individuals, because then all of a sudden everybody's coming into the office. They don't understand what life was like and what the cultural nuances are that you just don't get over video. And so, yes, people struggle, but I think that's a lot to do with the leadership and how they make sure that somebody's 7 days should be that they're not behind a video camera. They need to find ways to be able to interact with others. And if it's a global company, you also need to find a way for that person to travel and to be around people from different countries. Because if you want to implement change, if you're trying to drive an initiative, you can't do that having only a relationship over video.
True, very true. And I guess the impetus is on the leaders should lead by example
Mhm.
there,
Yes.
and be out there. And I think the teams always follow leaders to that extent. So I agree with you.
Right. And
Um,
there's an appreciation, I bet you when you went to the retail stores, as many as there was a real appreciation that individuals had for you coming out there and seeing them where they are and seeing their space. Because a lot of things you might pick up that you didn't know that need addressing, or things that are going exceptionally well because you were able to see it face to face.
True, true. That's so true. That's so true. Um, Going back to the topic of leadership integration, which is such a
Mhm.
uh, hot topic right now, given that everyone is looking for integrating leaders early so that they can budget positive results very quickly for the business, turn
Mhm.
around a sick business, or actually grow a business, have a run rate which is great, given that a lot of balance sheets are under seizure right now at times. Um, what would be the right way to assess that a leader is a great fit for an organization? Recently at Scientific, one of the things we have started doing with clients is we often work with them to run our candidates, which are hired through Scientific, or candidates who are actually already there, people who are already there, being promoted for succession planning into other roles, to go through a very specific scientific proprietary tool, which helps to predict that how they perform based on certain parameters. And there are
Mhm.
tons of tools out there, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're good or bad, but sometimes we depend too much on these tools. And I've seen that a particular tool, for example, I'm going to name it, everyone knows it, like Hogan, for example, or
Mhm.
for the matter, the disk profiling or the MBTI different versions. There's so many different types of tools out there, or the different OPQs. You know, at times, the leaders or the recruiting teams or the onboarding teams or the HR teams depend too much on the results of those
Mm.
tests, especially during promotions and hiring. And that leads to sometimes putting those people down who actually have a huge potential. They could have done really, really well, but all of a sudden, their experience is not looking the same light.
Right.
And what's the best way to look at this and make sure there's a balance there?
I think you're right. I think, part of it too is the ability to assess well from those tools. If you're not particularly skilled at it, it is difficult to do that. And so I've been in lots of organizations where part of executive hiring, you are doing assessment, but you're not necessarily using that to determine should you hire or not. You use other type of interview guides and behavioral interviewing to assess that, your reference check. And there's lots of ways to determine if somebody is right for the role. But where it's been successful is you use that for onboarding. So if you determine in your assessment that somebody might need A, B, or C, or might have a little bit of a deficit, but you still say, I want to hire this person, you then factor that into their onboarding plan for their first, again, 60, 90, 120 days. The other way, and I've experienced this myself, was you assess your skills against the leadership skills. of the person you may report to, and you say, is this going to be complementary or not? And again, if you still make the determination to hire, then you say, well, how do we work best together? I might bring a skill around sort of I'm action oriented. I'm really good at project planning. And my counterpart might be really good about sort of thinking through and brainstorming. And those could be at odds, or you can make them super complementary skill sets. So again, I believe in assessments if they're done well and for what purpose. And I think the best use of a lot of these assessment tools are really around how do you then successfully build in onboarding plans. If you can't tell, I'm very passionate about executive integration because to your point, if you spend all the money and time upfront to hire somebody, you need to spend equal time on how you're going to make them successful. Because with executive, for all intents and purposes, they're trusting you and they're taking a leap of faith to leave something that they've done for a really generally long period of time to say, I'm betting with you on the future for myself and this company. And then they arrive, and to your point, somebody sits and doesn't talk to somebody for 6 or 7 days. You know, in that moment, they're questioning their decision to join. Because if I say I'm going to hire you, Ashu, it's up to me. I need to stand for your success. And I think what I've seen work really well, if I was to hire you, I'm actually held accountable in a very measurable way for your success into the organization. And I think that's an important thing that sometimes is missed.
And I want to underscore that point for everyone. You said something really important. I'm going to use that in a lot of conversations. The amount of time someone and the money someone spends in hiring an executive, a top leader, should be equal to the time or amount of time and money one spends in integrating that person in the organization fabric. And I think
Mhm.
that's such an important statement you made there, Jackie, because uh, it gets missed out, to be honest, a lot these days, a lot. Both for leaders getting hired as well leaders getting promoted or moved to a new
Mhm.
role laterally. The time spent on preparing them and integrating them is never equal to the time spent thinking about and finding them. And that's really, really important. Um, in consulting firms, Jackie, one thing which a lot of consulting firms and even tech organizations faces, and I'm seeing that happen now with family-run organizations, large organizations as well. When they're looking to move a director to a partner, a director to a board role, or a general manager to a director role, any of those big shifts,
Mhm.
the total CEO level kind of a CXO level shift, um, they do look for people who are very much uh, like they are. And I'm going to repeat what I
Mhm.
said there, their own clothes, right? At the
Right.
same time, it's human to do that. I want to be also a little soft on the organizations because you like to work with people who are like you. It becomes like a normal psychological bias there, and it's an
Mhm.
unconscious bias. Now, what's your advice to uh, the people who are taking up a new role or getting promoted or looking to join a new organization to not fight this bias, but overcome this unconscious bias from the employer or from the future leader who they're going to be reporting to?
It's a really good point. Oftentimes, maybe somebody that's not as vocal or is not as visible is often overlooked. There was somebody I worked with, I believe it was back in Wipro, and given that was a global organization with the majority of the footprint was in India, but the organization was very cognizant of how do you expand in a lot of other regions. And there was a conversation a leader had, which was he actually did it really well. What he said was, and he did it through assessment tools. Here's my current group of direct reports. Here's the strengths they all bring to me. Here's their own development areas. And he would consciously pull people to join that direct report group or his leadership team that had a very different skill set. Because in his mind, if I brought people in that each have a different strength, I'm going to be ultimately stronger. Because if you bring people in that are just like you or same skill set as you're often missing something that would be very complementary to that larger group, to help you be successful. And so I think he did it the best I've ever seen it. And I've actually used a lot of that as you're building out your own direct reports or guiding others on what they should do. Getting back to thinking through a global organization, that's where it's incredibly important to do that, because each culture might have different ways that people operate. You need to be mindful of that and then say, okay, is that a cultural nuance, or is that a developmental area? Right. And we knew that when we were hiring together in India, but then, you think about Europe and you think about the US, and how do you bring together a global team that works really well together? So I like that you brought that up. I think it's a really important thing for organizations to think through. And there's lots of different ways to get at it, of how do you make that appropriate assessment in a mindful way, and not overlook somebody because they might just not be sort of front and center to you.
Thanks for that, Jackie. That's a very honest answer. And I think a lot of listeners and audience we have on Science Talk would benefit from that.
Mhm.
I'm going to shift gears slightly towards a different course here. My team has given me these three questions, which our coaches who give career advice to CXOs and business heads and leaders, have faced recently. And I'm going to put up two or three situations out there very quickly. And there's going to be a bit, not a rapid fire, but a very quick question response kind of thing.
Okay.
So one situation is where this particular person who was, let's say, a chief marketing officer of organization went into an organization where the leader was actually not from his background, was not a marketing person, purely speaking.
Mhm.
And he had a hard time trying to explain to the leader that what is he doing, what is the value he's bringing to the table. And the leader there was not able to represent him well or his initiatives at the board level, to
Mhm.
which led to his downfall. And that seems to be common for very similar technical or specialist roles, whether it is marketing, digital marketing, or it could be other SME roles in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. And to be honest, it's happening more and more. And I've experienced it myself, where oftentimes a reporting structure may change, where I'm reporting to somebody that doesn't have the background and experience I have. I worked for somebody once that it was great because he said, I know nothing about talent acquisition or talent in general. So you come to me for advice around the organization, or if you want to bounce off an idea, I could be sort of an objective listener. And he was really good. And part of it was he didn't have a strong ego. And he wasn't territorial or control. So he was like, you're the resident expert. I'm going to respect that. And then you may work for leaders, in your case, about the chief marketing officer, that maybe don't operate that way. But I think part of it, or maybe at least how you try to sort of move that, is have clear conversations up front, which is, how do we best work together? Here's what I'm bringing to the table. And then identify, well, this is how you're going to help me, right? You're my new leader. How do we best work together? And sometimes it's about, maybe it could be, as my earlier point, organizational navigation. Or if you're presenting to the board, could I also be there to help present? And sometimes it's just putting yourself out there and saying, how are we going to make this work the best? Because it is hard, it's very difficult. And I think if you don't have honest, open sort of conversations around how that's going to work, it could be a really difficult transition.
Right. And I think sometimes people tend to exit because of just that,
Yes.
the point, because they do not have that open conversation and just
Yep.
hope that the situation will autocorrect itself, which doesn't happen really.
No.
Thanks for the advice, Jackie. Um, we interact with a lot of clients where we do planning work for them, for leaders, career planning work such as succession planning. We do work on making sure that the leaders go through a certain assessment to develop themselves towards their future roles and things like that. And one of the common asks many of the clients have is that to do the exercise very quickly,
Mm,
because everyone is in a rush, right? Everything is as of
right.
yesterday these days. And probably I'm not the only one. Maybe any other colleague out there would be smiling hearing this, and even HR folks who work within organizations. Uh, how important is it for HR to push back, or a consultant to push back to a client and say, don't rush this because it's really important to go through a proper interviewing process, competency mapping, connection to leadership competencies, and running through an assessment to really identify, arrive, and then deliver the plan for that person. What's your thought about that?
So we've been, you and I were think about it, you're trying to establish local leadership, and what does that succession look like? I think and I've been part of organizations where it hasn't been done particularly well, and I've been there where it's done well. And where it's done well is it doesn't become a rushed exercise if you think about it in advance. You should know a year, 2 years, maybe even 3 years in advance, who's coming up that you are, helping to coach and mentor for that future leadership role. And it can't be a rushed exercise, because if you rush it, I've seen where somebody's put in a role for succession and they fail miserably because nobody has helped them along the way. They're just put in this new role without really understanding all the components of that role. And so at Suffolk, I will say it was a really thoughtful approach to how people are put in roles, a year, 2 years, 3 years, and what does that map look like for them to then take over a region, right? I might be a project executive today. How am I going to be in a role to be a general manager in the future, right? I think at Sapient, it was very thoughtful on a global level in that people were picked to do different global assignments with the end game in mind that they would eventually go back to their own region, right? That was not a rushed exercise. I think at some point in time it probably was. But the more time you spend on it, the more ability you are giving somebody to be successful, right? The only people that will get harmed when you rush it is the individual, the person that actually might be exiting that particular role. They want a successor in place for them to be able to go on to do what they need to do next. And then the organization itself, from a business perspective, if you don't get those right, you are impacting the business results ultimately.
So true. So true. Um, this is the last question, and thanks, Jack. You've been very patient and some great
Sure.
conversation here. It's going to continue to, I'm sure, receive a lot of queries. Um, we have one more query here, which has popped up, in the window, which my team has asked me to put up to you. And I just want to tell everyone, thank you so much for listening to the show. We're going to answer all the queries. This is a very important one, which is the most common query coming into people who are looking to move internationally from one region to another region, let's
Mhm.
say from US to Dubai, or Singapore, or two other countries. And for that purpose, we offer international relocation advice to people. And Jackie, what would be your 2 or 3 mantras for people who are looking for international relocation
Mm.
between countries or between regions?
I think, the biggest thing, and I've done this, right? So it was an assignment in India. I was very, very lucky to be able to do that. And then London, and then I worked in Germany and other countries, right? I think for me, what helped me was, one, do a lot of research up front. What is it like to work in those countries or regions? But more importantly, what helped me were people like you, Ashu, right? It was understanding and building relationships with people in that particular region to say, how are things done here? Just because I had at that time more experience on certain things in talent, that doesn't mean that I knew it all. And oftentimes I didn't, because the biggest thing you need to understand is the culture and engagement in that organization. So I go back to this example, and I was meeting with one of the executive search firms there. And I built a relationship with this individual, and we sat down to talk, and she said to me, and I started immediately asking her about her experience. And she said, I'm going to stop you. She said, I'm going to give you advice that's going to be very useful to you in this country, which is sort of start on the back of the resume. Talk about somebody's interests, their family, how they came to be who they are is far more important here than the experience. He said, you would turn a lot of people off. And I remember that moment, and I think about that often, because then in each country, I sort of said, how are things done here? But somebody like you, things that I, based on just having majority of my experience at the time in the US, you were very useful and helpful and supportive of me to say, here's what you need to think about. And so the advice I would give is understand the country you're going to, understand how things are done, but identify and sort of seek out that mentor for yourself or a group of mentors that are going to help you on the things you know nothing about, because that was a big thing, is to assume you know nothing and then learn and build those skills and be respectful of things that are different than you.
Great
And
advice.
enjoy the experience. I think the biggest thing for me was I took it all in. I didn't want to sort of just hang around, with other expats, if you will. I wanted to fully embrace the experience because it made it richer, and it made me have the ability to talk to people maybe that I was trying to recruit or build relationships with, because I then had some shared experiences.
Super. Great advice, Jackie. And I hope people who wrote that question or who asked that to my team got that answer, and keep sending whatever you need as
Mm.
advice. We love to respond back to you. Our team of experts, coaches, or consultants love to work in that space and help you and assist you with that. Um, Remember, we're going to just end the show on a beautiful note that leaders are the most important fabric of an organization, but they can't work without people. And when leaders don't integrate well and they leave, a lot of teams and people leave with them, which
Yes.
leads to long-term erosion of value and profits in organization. So that's why today's topic of leadership integration was extremely important. Hope you gained something out of it. And I would love to reach out to you, or you could reach out to me and Jackie as well, where we could help you support on all kind of leadership integration, or making sure that your succession planning or leadership planning is going well, because that is where it matters. That's where the rubber meets the road. And if that's happening well, uh, your team is going to stay focused and stable, and your business is going to be uplifted in the right direction. So, with that, thank you so much for listening to us. And Jackie, once again, a big thanks to be here on Scientific Talk. Hope we can send you some summer here from Dubai to Boston,
Please do.
over the next few days, and hope to meet you soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Ashu.
Thanks, Rick.